Thank you, Bill, Todd, Brian, and Kent. Wow. I think that may be my favorite Christmas song. Today's lesson is inspired by an author whose name you heard during the announcements, Eric Butterworth. It's inspired by an essay he wrote somewhere around 1979. But if you're not sure who Eric Butterworth is, or maybe you've never heard of him, let me just tell you a little bit about him. He was born in 1916 in Winnipeg, Canada, and his mother was a Unity minister. While he was a child, they moved to Southern California, and he was heavenly and heavily influenced by Unity teachings and the philosophy of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Eric Butterworth grew up, and he too became an ordained Unity minister, establishing churches in Pittsburgh, Detroit, and New York City. The Detroit church became the largest Unity church in the world under his leadership, followed by New York City. He is the author of 16 Unity best-selling books. My favorite, the one we will be doing a class in, Discover the Power Within You, and Spiritual Economics, among many others. Oprah Winfrey credits the book, Discover the Power Within You, and the teachings of Eric Butterworth as being the influence that changed her life. Maya Angelou called Eric Butterworth her teacher. And certainly the book, Discover the Power Within You, is the book that changed my life. So if you haven't taken that class or read that book, this is a golden opportunity. It will have an impact on you. But Eric's teachings focused on the divinity within all people, and he desired that everyone would know their oneness with God. He took the messages and the teachings of Charles Fillmore, Myrtle Fillmore, and so many others, and brought them up into the modern language, making them much easier to understand. Anybody read Charles Fillmore? Kind of a difficult read, isn't it? Eric Butterworth is much easier to read. He stressed the importance of utilizing spiritual principles to manifest healing, prosperity, and all good things. And he made his transition in 2003, writing books and articles right up to the very end. This particular essay he wrote, Christmas in Three Dimensions, had a huge impact on me when I read it. And I realized that he was onto something here. We are all very aware of the sights, the sounds, the smell, the feeling of Christmas. And we feel a connection at this time. And it may be, for most of us, a pleasant connection. But there are those, and maybe some of us in this room, who sometimes feel it's not so pleasant a connection. I believe that here in New Mexico, we are blessed, at least for me, as the energy of Christmas goes beyond religion. I love the smell of pinon smoke this time of year, biscochitos, that's a hint, tamales, farolitos, or luminarias, depending on which part of the state you're from and what side of the argument you want to be on. We kind of have that fun debate going on. Snow on the mountains and shops in Old Town and the small villages, the warmth of the pueblos and the other small towns around New Mexico, each celebrating Christmas or the solstice or the winter holidays in their own unique way. And in the years that I lived here, from 1979 to 2014, I guess I kind of took a lot of that for granted. And it wasn't until I was gone that I realized how powerful those symbols are and what they mean to me and what Christmas is really all about. It's a strangely beautiful and beautifully strange season of so many striking contrasts and paradoxes. It's a magic time, and it can also be a tragic time. Magic because of the way it transforms our streets, our stores, our homes, our hearts from the routine into a veritable land of fancy, of dreams, and that special Christmas glow. It can be tragic because I think on some level many of us understand also that it can be an illusion And behind the facade of tinsel and mistletoe, there is often a great deal of loneliness, heartache, and nostalgia that goes unfulfilled. And of course, there are challenges that still go on even during the Christmas season. Challenges of poverty, homelessness, violence, drug and alcohol use. And in the world, wars. And now we add to that in our modern day culture arguments over whether there's a war on Christmas or whether we should just give it up and recognize all religions or none. People vehemently saying, Jesus is the reason for the season. And a certain unity minister who says, really the reason for the season should be Mary. If you were here last week, you know that's me. She did the work. And it seems that society itself is no longer able to see that glorious energy around this time of year that has nothing really to do with religion. Instead, there's a demand that the beginning of winter, with all that it represents to so many different people and so many different belief systems, be put into a box called Christmas. So we're going to look at this and how we can transform this to something far more meaningful. The first thing to understand maybe is what Christmas is not. Christmas is not the birthday of Jesus. He was not born on December 25th. As a matter of fact, we don't know much of anything about his birth or his childhood, regardless of what it says in the scriptures. There's really no history of Jesus' early life at all, other than a few conflicting legends. And December 25th was a date arbitrarily set by a church leader back in the 6th century. So the first 600 years after Jesus, nobody knew when his birthday was. Without question, it was strongly influenced by the Roman feast of Saturnalia, because that was the time that Saturnalia came down from the north, distributing gifts and making merry at the darkest night of the year. But the darkest night of the year also represents the return of the light. So most of the symbols, are there any children in here? Okay, good. Then I can, Daddy. Most of the symbols, even Santa Claus himself, are borrowed from other traditions and other cultures. And there was a time in history when Christmas was not allowed to be celebrated, right here on this continent. In the 1600s, the Puritans outlawed the celebration of Christmas. You could be sent to prison or spend a day in the stocks if you were caught being festive or making merry. Yeah, not a whole lot of fun. It was not until after the Civil War that Christmas began to become a real holiday in the United States of America, probably in a large part because of the trauma that we had gone through during the Civil War. Interestingly enough, up until the 1800s, there was a law in Massachusetts that said, "Whosoever shall be found observing any such day as Christmas or the like, either by forbearing of labor, by feasting, or in any other way, shall be fined 5 shillings." And then everything broke loose in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And we've found ourselves now caught up into what Philip Wiley once referred to as the hopped-up, pressure-laden, status-seeking, competitive degradation of Christmas. So how do we get back to the real meaning of Christmas, to what it can mean to us as individuals and what it can mean to humanity as a return to the light? Well, perhaps we can do that because by understanding that Christmas, like all things, has many different dimensions to it. First, there's the story itself. Whether it is fact or legend, it is a beautiful story. Stories many of us grew up with. Stories that have similarities to other stories in other religions. We'll be actively practicing and participating in that story on Christmas Eve with our candlelight service. It has value. It's part of who we are and what we are. Then there's the second dimension, the theology, or the so-called theology of the story, which is where we might find our credulity stretched. There are actually 2 versions of the Christmas story in the Gospels, and they're distinctly different. There's two sets of characters, two legends, two entirely different settings. They're found in Luke and Matthew. Luke tells the story of pastoral simplicity. It is the source of the story of the shepherds in the field watching over their flocks by night, of the star in the east that came to them and the angels standing by filling the shepherds with fear. Angels do that a lot. And telling them of the birth of a Savior in a manger, and of their determination to go and see this thing that had come to pass. It's being reenacted in many, many ways, in cartoons and drama, even in our Christmas service. And then there's the story in Matthew, colored with the grandeur and the splendor of royalty and wonder. It's a story perhaps for people of wisdom and intellect, for it tells the story of the three wise men, sometimes referred to as the three kings, who came from the east to Jerusalem following a star that was quite likely an astrological sign, leading them to, in the story, the manger. However, in other traditions, they don't show up for 2 years after Jesus' birth. But nonetheless, they bring him presents of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And again, this is a dimension that we study, we learn about, we celebrate. And it too has value. But it is in the third dimension that we begin to move into the deeper, spiritual, heart-centered understanding of what this holiday we call Christmas really is. It's in this dimension that Christmas begins to make sense to us. And it's in this inner knowing that is not often acknowledged anymore or even given any thought to at all. It's an idea that is so important that it has several levels of understanding or handholds that we can lay hold of according to our consciousness. Whether like the shepherds in the field in faith and simplicity, or wise men and women in intellect and reason, regardless of how we understand the story, it can really be summed up into one of the most misunderstood and misused passages in the entire Bible. Anybody ever been to a football game or watched one on TV? You know that somewhere there's going to be somebody holding up a sign that says John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and whoever believes on him shall not die, but shall have life everlasting. And the interpretation is almost always, God so loved a sinful humanity that he came to earth as himself, sacrificed himself so that he could forgive his creations. Which, when you think about it, is kind of preposterous. Meister Eckhart, the Middle Ages mystic, I think understood that passage on a deeper level, though. For he wrote his interpretation of it. And it went like this: God never begot but one Son. The eternal truth is that God is forever begetting the only begotten. The only begotten Son, which John 3:16 refers to, is that within you that is the only begotten of God. It is the one child of God, the divine spark, the God self of you. And this is what Paul referred to when he wrote, Christ in you, your hope of glory. Christ in you, your hope of glory. Meister Eckhart went on to say, and whosoever liveth and believeth on this divine self within shall not die in the sense of experiencing any kind of deterioration in life, nor shall they fall away from the true awareness of their oneness with God. And I believe that's what the true meaning of Christmas is. It's to remind us of our oneness with God. I believe that is the true meaning of all of the winter holidays of all religions. To remind us that we are one with the Creator, by whatever name we call it, one with all life, one with all creation, one with one another. This is Christmas in the third dimension. The birth of a baby under varying circumstances and varying stories is always the birth of something from pure consciousness, represented in the story we're familiar with, of course, by Mary, the divine feminine within. It is the birth, it is the awakening to the Christ within us, the point of the divine light that is the truth of who we each are. So with that understanding, Christmas takes on a whole new meaning. Yes, we celebrate the stories and the legends. Whether they're true or not, it doesn't matter, for they represent something deeper to us. And we celebrate the birth of the Christ, and we celebrate the birth of the Christ within each one of us. And I would point out that that birth doesn't mean that you didn't have it before. The birth that we celebrate is the awakening to the awareness of the light that each and every human being is. The expression of God that each and every human being is. The Christ that Jesus modeled and that each and every human being is. So how do we celebrate that then in the third dimension? Well, we look at that point of light. We worship it. And the word worship originally meant to take on the quality of. So when we worship the Christ, we say we are taking on the quality of the Christ, the light, the love, the purity. That is our worship experience, recognizing that light, that spark, that beautiful divine idea that is the unborn possibility of limitless life. And yours is the privilege of giving birth to it, of releasing it, so that as the story tells us, it may grow in wisdom, stature, favor of God. This God self of you, this divine potential, is quickened, and you are inspired and blessed because of something that happens inside of you. A quickening fire that stokes up your enthusiasm, your creative juices, and all the vital parts of your life. And when life begins to flow in a new way in and through you, you will go forth, as Eric Butterworth wrote, walking in ways of vision, ways of love, and ways of creativity. And your life shall be blessed. And this Christmas for you shall be the most beautiful time of your life. Be grateful for this realization. And praise God for the vision of the Christ child of our hearts, our own God potential. Welcome and embrace the commitment that Christmas is. The commitment that Scrooge in the story of Christmas Carol woke up to keep Christmas always, and let it be a dynamic influence through all the days of your life. Merry Christmas.